The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Assembly was the largest structure ever built by any living species. It floated at the center of the galaxy, a massive station made of white metal and glass that caught the light of 1,000 distant stars. Inside, 18 species sat in a wide circle, each one older than the last, each one watching the doors at the far end of the hall. The doors opened, and the humans walked in. Tejo led them. He was a tall man with a calm face and steady eyes. He wore a dark suit with no medals, no ribbons, no symbols of rank. Behind him walked Hana, his vice ambassador, a woman with sharp features and even sharper instincts. Behind her came Nari, the intelligence officer, who moved like a shadow and said almost nothing. And behind them walked 6 security officers in plain black uniforms, their hands folded behind their backs. Every eye in the chamber followed them. Humanity had been traveling the stars for only 200 years. That was nothing. The Milari had been spacefaring for 11,000 years. The Delvari had been swimming between worlds for 8,000. The Korvathi had built their empire over 6,000 years of blood and war. And here were the humans, walking into the most powerful room in the galaxy, like they had been invited to a dinner party. They had been invited. That was the strange part. After decades of asking, begging, and negotiating, the Galactic Assembly had finally granted humanity a provisional seat. Tejo had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. He had studied every species, memorized every treaty, learned the political history of civilizations that had risen and fallen before Earth even had fire. He sat down in the human chair. It was smaller than the others. Vorel, the High Speaker, stood at the center of the chamber. He was Milari, tall, thin, with a body like a stick insect wrapped in silver robes. His eyes were large and black, and when he spoke, his voice buzzed like a broken speaker. He welcomed the human delegation with words that sounded polite but meant nothing. Then he moved to business. Before the human delegation may participate in assembly proceedings, Vorel said, there are certain conditions that must be addressed. A screen behind him lit up with a long list. Tejo read it quietly. Fleet reduction to 40% of current strength. A ban on colonizing any system within 300 light-years of existing assembly territory. Mandatory surrender of all artificial intelligence research. Submission to quarterly inspections by assembly observers. Hana leaned close to Tejo. This is not diplomacy, she whispered. This is a leash. Tejo did not react. He had spent 20 years in the military before becoming a diplomat, and he had learned long ago that the most dangerous thing a man could do in a hostile room was show his feelings. He looked around the chamber. The Korvathi representative, a massive reptilian creature named Gren, was watching him with open hatred. Gren's people had fought humans at the border 3 times in the last 50 years. They had lost every time. He did not like humans. He did not hide it. The Delvari representative, Ithan, sat in a tank of warm water on the far side of the chamber. He was old, even by Delvari standards, and his large, dark eyes carried something that looked almost like sadness. He was the only one in the room who did not seem hostile. Tejo stood and addressed the chamber. His voice was calm and clear. The human delegation thanks the assembly for this opportunity, he said. We have received the proposed conditions and request a standard review period of 48 hours before responding. Vorel's antenna twitched. He had expected resistance, maybe anger. Instead, he got patience. That was worse, somehow. Granted, Vorel said. The session ended. The delegations filed out through different exits, each species returning to their own section of the station. The humans walked in silence back to their quarters. A small set of rooms on the station's lower levels, far from the luxury suites given to the elder species. Once the door closed behind them, Hana spoke first. "They want to break us," she said. "Those conditions would cripple our fleet and hand over our most advanced technology. No other species was asked to give up this much." "No other species was feared this much," Tejo said quietly. He sat down at the table and looked at Nari. She had not spoken a single word since they arrived, but he knew she had been working. Nari was the best intelligence officer Earth had ever produced. She could crack encryptions that machines could not solve, and she had a memory that forgot nothing. "Tell me," he said. Nari placed a small datapad on the table. Her voice was flat and precise. "I intercepted encrypted communications between the Malari Dominion and the Korvathi Empire. They have formed a secret military alliance. The target is Earth." The room went cold. "There is a document," Nari continued. "They call it the Containment Accord. It authorizes a joint fleet to blockade our home system and forcefully dismantle our military. The vote is already arranged. 12 of the 18 assembly species have been bribed or pressured into supporting it. The vote is scheduled for the next session." "When is the next session?" 20 hours. Silence filled the room. Tejo stared at the datapad. His face was still, but something changed behind his eyes. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something older and deeper, something that had kept humanity alive through ice ages and plagues and wars that burned half the world to ash. It was refusal. He picked up the datapad and read the key line from the secret communication between Vorel and Gren. It said, "The human problem must be solved before they realize their own strength." Tejo set the datapad down. He looked at Hana. He looked at Nari. Then he opened a secure channel to a ship that was hiding on the dark side of a moon, 3 systems away. Commander Sunwoo's face appeared on the screen. "Commander," Tejo said, "wake the fleet." And somewhere in the cold dark of space, behind a moon that had no name, 400 warships began to light up, one by one, their engines glowing like a field of newborn stars. Tejo did not sleep that night. He sat in the small room the assembly had given him and read every word of the Containment Accord. Nari had pulled the full document from the encrypted channel, all 47 pages of it, and the more he read, the colder his blood became. It was not just a blockade. The accord called for the permanent military occupation of Earth's solar system. Human ships would be seized. Human colonies would be placed under the direct control of assembly-appointed governors. Human children would be educated in assembly schools, taught assembly history, raised to think of themselves as junior members of a galactic order they had no part in building. It was not containment. It was erasure. Hana sat across from him, reading her own copy. She had not spoken in over an hour. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red, but not from sadness. From rage. "They planned this before they ever invited us," she said. "Yes," Tejo said. "The invitation was the trap." "Yes." Hana stood and walked to the window. Outside, the stars burned in silence. She could see the distant shapes of alien warships docked at the station, their hulls decorated with the symbols of empires that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. Those empires had watched humanity crawl out of its own ashes, build ships, reach the stars, and grow strong in barely 2 centuries. And they were terrified. "I want to go public," Hana said. "Broadcast the accord. Show every species what the Milari and Korvathi are really doing." Tejo shook his head slowly. "It will not matter. The votes are already bought. Vorel controls the chamber. Even if we showed the evidence to every delegate in person, the vote would still pass. The assembly's rules were written by the powerful, for the powerful. Evidence means nothing when the judge is your enemy." Nari was sitting in the corner, her legs crossed, her eyes closed. She looked like she was sleeping, but she was listening to everything. She opened one eye. "He is right," she said. "I have tracked the communication patterns. The 12 species supporting the Accord are locked in. 3 were bribed with trade agreements. 4 were threatened with sanctions. 5 simply fear the Corvati too much to say no. There is no legal path to stop this vote. Hana turned from the window. Then what do we do? Tejo leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a long time, and then he began to speak. Not about the Accord, but about Earth. He talked about the wars, the ones they taught in schools, and the ones they tried to forget. He talked about the centuries of bloodshed, the empires that rose and fell, the weapons that grew more terrible with every generation. He talked about the plagues that killed millions, and the famines that killed millions more. He talked about the time humanity split the atom and then pointed it at itself. Every species in this galaxy evolved in stability, Tejo said. The Milari had a homeworld with perfect weather and endless food. The Delvari lived in oceans so deep that danger could not reach them. The Corvathi were the biggest predators on their planet from the very beginning. None of them ever had to fight for survival the way we did. He paused. We almost destroyed ourselves a dozen times. We burned our forests, poisoned our rivers, melted our ice, and still we survived. Not because we were smart, not because we were kind, because we are the most stubborn thing this universe has ever produced. We do not know how to stop. We do not know how to kneel. And every single time we fell, we got back up and built something better from the wreckage. She had known Tejo for 15 years, and she had never heard him speak like this. That is what they are afraid of, he said. Not our ships, not our weapons. They are afraid that if they give us time, we will become something they cannot control. And they are right. He stood and walked to the communication console. He opened the secure channel again. Commander Sunwoo appeared on the screen. He was a broad man with a square jaw and short-cropped hair. Behind him, the bridge of the HSS Baekdu hummed with quiet activity. The fleet is awake, Sunwoo said. 412 ships, all armed, all crewed, awaiting orders. Move them to position 7, Tejo said. Outside the assembly station, close enough to be seen. Sunwoo did not blink. That will be considered an act of aggression. No, Tejo said, it will be considered a statement. Sunwoo nodded once and cut the channel. You are going to walk into that chamber tomorrow. Yes. And you are going to tell them we know everything. Yes. And then what? Tejo looked at her. For the first time since they had arrived on the station, something close to a smile crossed his face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had been pushed to the edge and decided to push back. Then we leave, he said. Nari opened both eyes now. They will not expect that. They expect us to beg. They expect us to negotiate. They expect us to fight. Exactly, Tejo said. And we will do none of those things. We will stand up. We will tell them the truth. And we will walk out. Let them sit in that chamber and wonder what comes next. He turned off the lights. In 17 hours, the assembly would vote on the future of humanity. And humanity was going to give them an answer that no species in the history of the galaxy had ever given before. Not surrender. Something far more terrifying. Silence. Outside, moving through the dark of space like ghosts, the human fleet crept closer. Their weapons were hot. Their shields were raised. And on every bridge, on every ship, the crews stood at their stations with steady hands and calm hearts, waiting for the order that might change the galaxy forever. On the Baekdu, young Doyun sat at his communications console and watched the tactical display. 412 green dots, moving in perfect formation toward a point in space that no human fleet had ever reached before. Sir, he said to Sunwoo, are we really going to do this? Sunwoo looked at the stars through the main viewport. His voice was steady as stone. The grand chamber was full. Every seat was taken. Every species had sent their representative, their advisors, their guards. The room buzzed with the sound of 100 different languages being translated by machines that hung from the ceiling like silver spiders. Light poured in through the massive glass dome above, filling the chamber with cold, white starlight. Tejo walked in with his delegation. He wore the same dark suit. His hands were at his sides. His face showed nothing. Hana walked one step behind him, her jaw tight. Nari walked behind her, carrying nothing, watching everything. Every alien in the room turned to look at them. Tejo sat down. He placed his hands flat on the desk in front of him. He did not speak. He did not look at anyone. He simply waited. Vorel stood at the center podium. The high speaker's silver robes caught the light as he moved, and his black eyes swept across the chamber like a searchlight. He tapped a long, thin finger on the podium and called the session to order. "We have new business," Vorel said. Gren rose from his seat immediately. The Korvathi warlord was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, with thick green scales and a jaw that could bite through steel. His voice was deep enough to shake the floor when he spoke. "I bring forward a proposal," Gren said. "The Galactic Safety and Stability Accord, a measure designed to protect the Assembly and its members from the growing threat of unchecked military expansion by provisional species." He did not say the word human. He did not have to. Gren read from the sanitized version of the accord. It sounded reasonable. It sounded fair. It talked about peace and balance and the safety of all galactic citizens. It said nothing about occupation. It said nothing about seizing ships or controlling colonies. Those parts had been removed, hidden in classified sections that only the voting members had been shown. One by one, the other species voiced their support. The tall, bird-like delegates from the Sarathi Federation spoke in favor. The crystalline beings from the Toshan Collective agreed. The 6-armed engineers of the Palak Union nodded their many heads. 12 species in a row, all repeating the same polished words, all playing their part in a script that had been written long before this session began. Ethan, the Delvari representative, sat in his water tank and said nothing. His dark eyes moved from speaker to speaker, and his gills fluttered with something that might have been shame. When the last supporter had finished speaking, Vorel turned to Tejo. "The human delegation may speak before the vote, if they wish," Vorel said. His voice carried the tone of a man offering a glass of water to someone he had already poisoned. Tejo stood. The chamber fell silence. Not the polite silence of diplomacy, but the deep, heavy silence of an audience that knows something is about to happen. He looked at Vorel. He looked at Gren. He looked around the entire chamber, meeting the eyes of every single species that had spoken in favor of the accord. And then he spoke. "I have read the Containment Accord," he said. "The real one, not the version that was presented today." The silence became something sharper. Vorel's antenna went stiff. "I know about the secret alliance between the Milari Dominion and the Korvathi Empire," Tejo continued. His voice was calm and even, like a man reading the weather. "I know that 12 of the 18 species in this chamber were bribed or threatened into voting yes. I know that 3 were promised new trade routes. I know that 4 were told their border disputes would be resolved in their favor. And I know that 5 were simply too afraid of the Korvathi to say no." Gren slammed his fist on his desk. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. "You dare accuse this assembly of corruption?" "I am not accusing," Tejo said. "I am stating facts." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. He pressed it, and a holographic display appeared above the center of the chamber. It showed the intercepted communications, the backroom deals, the exact amounts of the bribes, the threats, the promises. Every dirty secret, floating in the air for all to see. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted at each other. Advisors scrambled to send messages to their homeworlds. Gren roared so loud that the translation machines buzzed with distortion. Tejo waited for the noise to die down. And when it did, he spoke again. "You are afraid of us. And you should be." The room froze. Not because we are violent, though we are. Not because we are many, though we are. You should be afraid because we are the only species in this galaxy that was forged in fire and chose to walk into the light anyway. He paused. His eyes moved slowly across the chamber. You looked at our history and saw monsters. You saw the wars, the weapons, the cruelty we showed to each other. And you decided that we were too dangerous to exist as equals. But you missed something. You missed the part where we stopped. You missed the part where we looked at the ashes of our own world and chose to rebuild instead of destroy. You missed the part where we reached the stars not because we conquered our way there, but because we decided, together, that there had to be something better. He picked up his assembly credentials, the small metal badge that marked humanity's seat, and placed it gently on the podium. You should have seen survivors, he said. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Hana stood and followed him. Nari stood and followed her. The 6 security officers rose in unison and fell into step behind them. Their footsteps echoed through the chamber in perfect rhythm, steady and unhurried, the sound of people who were not running away, but choosing to leave. The doors of the grand chamber opened. Tejo walked through them without looking back. His delegation followed. The doors closed behind them, with a sound that seemed to echo longer than it should have. For a full 10 seconds, nobody in the chamber moved. The old Delvari's voice was quiet, barely louder than a whisper. But in the dead silence of the chamber, every being heard him clearly. You have made a terrible mistake, he said. Vorel opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a tactical officer burst through a side door. He was Milari, young and thin, and his face was the color of ash. He stumbled to Vorel's side and leaned close to the high speaker's ear. Long-range sensors, the officer stammered. A fleet, a human fleet, over 400 warships. They are not near Earth. They are here, right outside the station. Vorel's black eyes went wide. For the first time in his long career as high speaker, he had no words. Through the glass dome above the chamber, if anyone had thought to look up, they would have seen it. A shadow was passing over the stars. Not one ship, not 10. A wall of dark metal and glowing engines, moving in perfect silence, settling into position around the station like a fist slowly closing. The galaxy held its breath. On the bridge of the HSS Baekdu, Commander Sunwoo stood with his hands behind his back and watched the assembly station grow larger through the main viewport. It was a beautiful structure, he had to admit. White and silver, shaped like a ring with a crystal dome at its center, spinning slowly against the black of space. It looked like something that should last forever. Around it, his fleet had taken position. 412 warships, arranged in a perfect sphere, their weapons armed, their shields active, their engines idling with a low hum that vibrated through every hull. They did not fire. They did not broadcast threats. They did not move. They simply existed, a wall of human steel wrapped around the most important place in the galaxy. Doyen sat at his communications console, his fingers hovering over his controls. He was 24 years old, the youngest officer on the bridge, and his heart was beating so hard he was sure the entire crew could hear it. Sir, Doyun said, we are receiving hails from the station. Assembly Command is demanding we identify ourselves and state our intentions. Sunwoo did not turn. Do not respond. Sir, the Milari Defense Fleet is powering weapons. How many ships? 47. Sun Wu allowed himself a small breath through his nose. It was almost a laugh. Let them. Inside the assembly station, chaos had taken hold. The grand chamber had emptied as delegates rushed to their own communication centers, shouting orders, sending messages, demanding answers from homeworlds that were too far away to help. Vorel stood at the center of the storm, his silver robes wrinkled, his antenna flat against his skull, barking commands at officers who had no good news to give him. "Where is the Korvathi fleet?" Vorel demanded. 14 days out at maximum speed, the tactical officer replied. "The Sarathi?" 22 days. "Anyone?" The officer swallowed. "The Malari defense fleet is the only force within range. 47 ships against 400. Vorel turned to Gren, who stood in the corner of the command room like a mountain of scales and fury. The Korvathi warlord was gripping the edge of a table so hard that the metal was bending under his fingers. "You told me your fleet would be here," Vorel said. "They were supposed to be," Gren growled. "The humans were not supposed to know about the Accord. They were not supposed to have a fleet this close. How did they know?" Neither of them had an answer. On the Baekdu, Taeho and his delegation arrived through the docking port. Hana was the first through the airlock, and the moment her feet touched the deck of a human ship, the tension in her shoulders dropped by half. She was home. They all were. Taeho walked straight to the bridge. Sunwoo saluted him. Taeho nodded. "Status," Taeho said. "Fleet is in position. No shots fired, no hostile actions taken. The Milari defense fleet has their weapons hot, but they have not moved. They know the numbers." "Good." Taeho turned to Hana. "It is time." Hana sat down at the communication station next to Doyun. She looked at the young officer and gave him a nod that said more than any words could. Then she opened a broadcast channel. Not a private channel, not an encrypted frequency. She opened every channel, on every frequency, to every world in the galaxy that had a receiver. "This is Vice Ambassador Hana of the human delegation," she said. "This message is for every species, every world, and every citizen of the Galactic Assembly." She paused. Then she transmitted a file. It was massive. It contained the complete, unedited history of the human species. Not the version that alien scholars had studied from a distance. Not the version that the Assembly had used to justify their fear. The real history. All of it. It showed the wars. Every single one. The ancient battles fought with swords and spears. The industrial slaughters fought with guns and gas. The nuclear fire that nearly ended everything. It showed the genocides, the slavery, the cruelty that humans had inflicted on each other for thousands of years. And then it showed what came after. The moments when ordinary people stood against tyrants and said no. It showed the treaties signed after wars that seemed endless. It showed the hands reaching across borders, across oceans, across the scars of history. It showed humans building hospitals in cities they had bombed. It showed them feeding children in nations they had once tried to destroy. It showed them climbing out of every grave they had dug for themselves and choosing, again and again and again, to try one more time. Hana spoke again. Her voice was steady and clear, and it carried across the galaxy at the speed of light. "This is what you tried to cage. We do not hide from what we are. We have been cruel, we have been foolish, we have hurt ourselves and each other in ways that we can never fully repair. But we are still here. We are still standing. And we did not come to this galaxy to conquer. We did not come to enslave. But we will never kneel. Not to fear, not to anyone." Chapter 2. The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the transmission in silence. On water worlds, and desert worlds, and ice worlds, and worlds made of crystal and gas, they watched humanity lay itself bare, and felt something they had never felt before when looking at the strange, short-lived species from the edge of the galaxy. They felt something close to awe. Inside the assembly station, the coalition began to crack. Ithan was the first. The old Delvari surfaced in his tank and broadcast a public statement condemning the containment accord and calling for its immediate dissolution. Within an hour, 3 other minor species followed, then 2 more. The carefully built alliance of fear was falling apart, brick by brick. Gren was furious. He stormed into Varel's command center and demanded that the assembly authorize military force against the human fleet. He pounded the table. He roared until the walls shook. He called the defecting species cowards and traitors. Vorel stood still and said nothing, because Vorel understood something that Gren did not. The humans had not just brought a fleet, they had brought a mirror. They had shown the galaxy what they were, and in doing so, they had forced every other species to look at what they themselves had become. A collection of old empires so afraid of change that they were willing to destroy the one species that might have made them better. Vorel hesitated, and in that hesitation, the balance shifted. On the bridge of the Baekdu, Doyun's console beeped. He stared at the screen, blinked, and stared again. "Sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we are receiving a transmission. It is coming from deep space. Very deep space. The signal origin is, I have never seen coordinates like this." Sun Wu frowned. "Who is it?" Doyun ran the signal through the database. The match came back, and the color drained from his face. "It is the Olvari, sir." Every person on the bridge went still. The Olvari were the oldest known civilization in the galaxy. They had been spacefaring before any other living species had developed language. They had not spoken to anyone in over 300 years. Most species believed they had gone extinct or ascended beyond the physical world entirely. "What does it say?" Sun Wu asked. Doyun swallowed hard and read the message aloud. It was 5 words long. "Let the humans speak again." The bridge was silent. Sun Wu looked at Taeho. Taeho looked at Hana. Hana looked at the stars through the viewport. And for the first time, since they had arrived at the assembly, she smiled. The Olvari message changed everything. 5 words from a civilization that had not spoken in 3 centuries carried more weight than all the warships in the galaxy combined. Within hours, the remaining supporters of the containment accord began to withdraw. Species that had been bullied or bribed into silence found their courage, one by one, like candles being lit in a dark room. Vorel had no choice. He sent a formal request to the human delegation, asking them to return to the assembly. Taeho made him wait 3 days. It was not cruelty, it was strategy. Every hour that passed, every hour the human fleet sat motionless outside the station, without firing a single shot. The message grew louder. The galaxy had expected humans to attack. They had expected fire and blood and the savage violence that every alien species had spent 2 centuries warning each other about. And silence, Taeho knew, was the most terrifying thing of all. On the 3rd day, Taeho put on his dark suit, straightened his collar, and walked back to the grand chamber. The room was different now. The confident buzz of the first session was gone. The delegates sat in their seats like students who had been caught cheating. They did not whisper to each other. They did not make eye contact. Vorel stood at the center podium, and for the first time, the high speaker looked small. Gren was there too, but something had changed in the Korvathi warlord. His allies had abandoned him. His fleet was still 2 weeks away, and no longer relevant. He sat in his oversized chair, with his arms crossed, and his yellow eyes burning, but the fire behind them had dimmed. He was a predator who had cornered his prey, only to discover that the prey had teeth bigger than his own. Taeho sat down. Hana sat beside him. Nari took her position in the back, watching, always watching. Vorel opened the session. His voice was thin and careful. The containment accord has been withdrawn, he said. The assembly recognizes this and moves to new business. A murmur passed through the chamber. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of what they had tried to do. Just a quiet burial of a plan that had nearly started a galactic war. Tejo stood. I have new business, he said. Every eye turned to him. The fear in the room was real. The delegates expected punishment. They expected demands, sanctions, reparations. Some of them expected a declaration of war. Humanity had every right to be furious, and the galaxy was waiting to see what that fury looked like. What Tejo did next became the most discussed moment in galactic history for the next 1,000 years. He proposed a new charter, not for humanity, a complete restructuring of the Galactic Assembly. He laid out a plan for a galactic tribunal with rotating leadership so that no single species could hold power permanently. He proposed independent oversight committees that would monitor all backroom deals and secret alliances. He called for transparent voting, open proceedings, and a set of fundamental rights that applied to every species equally, from the oldest empire to the youngest spacefaring civilization. The chamber was stunned into absolute silence. We did not come here to punish you, Tejo said. We came here to sit at this table as equals. You tried to deny us that. You failed. And now we have a choice. We can let this moment define us as enemies, or we can let it define us as something better. He looked directly at Vorel. Humanity knows what it is like to build systems that are unfair. We spent most of our history doing exactly that. And we know what it costs to tear those systems down and build new ones. It costs blood and time and more patience than any sane species should have. But we did it. Again and again, we did it. And we are offering to help you do it too. I second the proposal, the old Delvari said. One by one, others followed. The Sarathi Federation, ashamed of their role in the Accord, voted yes. The Toshan Collective, the Pollock Union, species that had stood against humanity just days ago, now stood with them. The coalition of fear was being replaced by something else, something fragile and new and uncertain, but real. Gren stood up. The massive Korvathi looked around the chamber at the faces of species he had once bullied and threatened. He turned and walked out through the side door. His footsteps shook the floor, and when the door closed behind him, it felt like the end of something very old and very tired. Vorel was the last to speak. The High Speaker stood at his podium, his silver robes hanging loose on his thin frame, and looked at Tejo with an expression that no human could fully read. There was defeat in it, yes, but there was something else too. Something that might have been in the strange alien way that the Milari experienced emotion. Respect. The proposal is accepted, Vorel said. The Assembly will convene a drafting committee for the new charter. The human delegation will hold a permanent seat. The chamber erupted. Not in anger this time, but in the chaotic, messy sound of 100 species trying to figure out what the future looked like. On the Baekdu, Sunwoo received the message. He read it twice, then looked up at his crew. Stand down, he said. Power down weapons. Lower shields. Across the fleet, 412 warships went quiet. The glow of their weapons faded. The hum of their shields dropped to silence. They sat in the dark of space like sleeping giants, their job done without a single shot fired. Doyun leaned back in his chair and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for days. Sir, he said, do you think it is really over? Sunwoo looked through the viewport at the assembly station, at the alien ships that were slowly unclenching their own fists, at the stars that burned the same way they had burned for billions of years, before any living thing had looked up and wondered what they were. It is never over, Sunwoo said. But today, they learned something important. What is that, sir? There was a warmth in the old commander's eyes that Doyun had never seen before. That the scariest thing in this galaxy is not a species that fights. It is a species that fights and then offers you a hand up afterward. 6 months later, on a clear evening on Earth, Nari sat in her apartment and watched a live broadcast of the first session of the new Galactic Tribunal. 12 species were seated at a round table, each one equal, each one visible, each one accountable. A Delvari was chairing the session. A human sat 3 seats to the left, taking notes and listening carefully. Nari poured herself a glass of something strong and held it up to the screen. She did not smile often. She had spent too many years in the shadows for that. But tonight, alone in her apartment, with the light of distant stars coming through her window, she allowed herself one. Somewhere out in the black, the Korvathi were rebuilding their fleet and whispering about revenge. The Ulvari had gone silent once more, watching from whatever ancient place they called home. Varel had resigned as High Speaker and disappeared into retirement on a Milari colony world where nobody asked him questions. And humanity, stubborn and terrifying and impossibly kind, had changed the shape of the galaxy. Not with fire, not with conquest, not with the savagery that every species had warned each other about for 200 years. They had done it with the one thing no other civilization in the history of the stars had ever thought to try. Trust, backed by teeth. Nari took a sip of her drink. She looked at the stars, and somewhere deep inside her, in the place where intelligence officers keep the things they cannot say out loud, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time.